Winter in Pine Hollow didn't just arrive. It crept in quietly, slowly wrapping itself around the town like a heavy blanket no one could shake off. The kind of cold that wasn't just outside, it crawled into your bones, into your thoughts. Even the houses, old and leaning, seemed to groan under the weight of the snow and silence. For 3 days straight, the snow had fallen without rest, covering everything in thick, frozen layers. Paths disappeared, trees drooped under the weight, and even sound felt muffled, as if the town had been placed under glass. The air had a bite to it, sharp and cutting. Every breath Emily took came out in pale, ghostly clouds, vanishing before they could warm her face. It was as if even her breath didn't want to linger in that cold. She was only 14, but she walked like someone who had seen too much. Her boots crunched softly in the snow, each step echoing something deeper grief that had settled inside her and made a home there. She was headed to her grandmother's cabin, tucked far into the edge of the woods, where the trees stood tall and closed like silent watchers. Since her parents' accident the year before, Emily had become a quiet shadow of herself. She no longer ran. She drifted, like snow caught on the wind, unsure where she might land. The cabin was small and worn, its wooden sides bruised by time and winter storms. But inside, her grandmother waited, a pot of soup always warm on the stove, to smell, of herbs and onion mixing with the scent of firewood. It was the only warmth Emily knew now. Still, no matter how warm the fire was or how kind her grandmother's voice sounded, the nights inside that cabin stretched long and lonely. The silence there was not peaceful, it was full of memories that no longer spoke out loud. The walls, it seemed, remembered laughter that had vanished. Sometimes Emily would sit by the window for hours, watching the snow fall and wondering if grief ever softened or if it simply froze inside you, layer by layer, like the ice building on the trees. That evening, the world felt especially still. The snow had stopped, and the wind moved through the trees like a song with no words, low and aching. Emily tightened her scarf around her neck and continued along the narrow path, her small figure nearly swallowed by the white around her. The air was quieter than usual, heavy like it was waiting for something. She reached the old wooden bridge that crossed a narrow creek now frozen solid. The boards beneath her creaked and groaned, but the sounds were hushed, buried under soft snow. She paused halfway across, glancing down at the sheet of ice beneath her boots. The ice shimmered pale blue beneath the fading light. She'd crossed this bridge many times before, hundreds, maybe, but tonight it felt different. The woods around her, the sky, even the air, it all seemed to be watching. Suddenly, a gust of wind rose up, sharp and sudden, flinging icy flakes across her face. She winced, her eyes watering, and quickly wiped at them with the back of her mitten. And that's when she saw it barely there, just at the far edge of the bridge. A small shape, almost hidden, half buried in the snow. At first, she wasn't even sure it was real. Her breath caught in her throat. Probably a branch, she whispered, or maybe someone dropped a hat. But she didn't believe her own words. There was something strange about that patch of darkness against the snow. Something that pulled at her in a quiet, aching way. It wasn't fear, not exactly. And it wasn't curiosity either. It was something deeper, like standing at the edge of something important. She stepped off the bridge slowly, boots sinking deeper into the snow with each movement. The world around her was so quiet, every crunch underfoot felt loud. The air shifted, colder somehow, but alive. She felt it like a thread tugging gently at her chest, urging her closer. Look closer. The feeling whispered through her, not in words, but in something older than that. She knelt, her knees pushing into the snow, and reached out with her gloved hands to brush aside the frost-covered layer. Her hands were quickly wet and cold, but she didn't notice. Beneath the snow was something small, so small it barely seemed real. A puppy, curled up in a tight ball, covered in ice and barely moving. Its fur was matted and gray, blending into the snow like it belonged there. She couldn't even tell at first if it was breathing. Her heart clenched. Oh, the sound came out like a breathless prayer. Without thinking, she reached for her scarf, fingers fumbling with the knot. She wrapped the soft, warm fabric gently around the tiny creature. It felt weightless like it was made of snow and sadness. But when she lifted it, something stirred under her hands. A heartbeat. Faint. But there. Hold on, little one. Please hold on. Her voice was soft and trembling. The cold bit into her hands, into her sleeves, but she didn't care. That small heartbeat pressed against her palms, stubborn and fragile. For the first time in months, something inside her woke up. The thread she'd felt tugging her forward now wrapped all around her. She didn't know where the puppy had come from or why it had ended up in her path. But she knew, deep in her bones, that she couldn't leave it. She clutched the bundle to her chest and turned. The bridge creaked again under her hurried steps as she ran. Behind her, the forest disappeared into stillness. Emily burst through the cabin door, snow falling from her coat and boots as the warmth of the fire rushed to greet her. The flickering light danced across the walls. "Emily?" Her grandmother called from the kitchen. She stepped into the room and stopped. Her eyes landed on the bundle in Emily's arms, and for a long second, neither of them spoke. In that fragile shape wrapped in the half-frozen scarf, she didn't just see a small creature. She saw Emily, the same desperation, the same silent plea not to lose something else. A reflection of the night they had first clung to each other after the accident, when Emily's tiny hands had grasped her sleeve like they'd vanish if she ever let go. "It's alive, Grandma," Emily said quickly, her voice shaking. "Please, behave to help it. No questions, no hesitation." Her grandmother supplemented and moved to stoke the fire higher, while Emily knelt on the braided rug in front of the hearth. Shoin wrapped her scarf carefully, revealing the tiny, motionless body. The heat off the cabin felt harsh against its icy fur. Emily's hands shook as she rubbed its sides gently, trying to coax life back into it. "Come on, please," she whispered, her words trembling like her fingers. Her grandmother returned with Asmol bottle of milk warmed on the stove and an old dropper. "Try this," she murmured, placing them into Emily's hands with quiet urgency. Emily tilted the tiny head, easing a single drop of milk onto its tongue. For a terrifying minute, nothing happened. Then, so faint she almost missed it, the smallest twitch of its tongue. Her breath caught. "You're still here," she whispered. And this time, her voice broke into a trembling laugh. Another drop. Another wake, stubborn swallow. The cabin cemento exhaled with her, the crackle of fire and the faint sound of wind outside building. Into something soft. Alive. Emily tucked the tiny body into her scarf again and held it close, her cheek brushing the damp fur. "You're ash," she whispered, like the last spark in fire. Somewhere deep inside, the invisible thread between them tightened, and for the first time in a year, Thekabin felt less empty. Emily sat cross-legged on the worn rug, her knees pulled close as she hovered near Thefire. The tiny bundle lay on a folded blanket right beside the hearth, wrapped in her scarf. Ash's fur was still damp, but the ice had melted away, leaving only the faint shiver of a fragile body fighting to stay. Her grandmother moved quietly around them, adding another log to the fire. Careful not to disturb Themament, she watched Emily's small hands cup the creature's side as if her touch alone could anchor it to the world. Emily bent closer, her lips brushing damp fur. "You're safe now," she whispered. "You're not alone anymore. I promise." The words trembled, carrying more weight than just for the tiny life at her side. Hours slipped by in the warm flicker of firelight. Emily didn't sleep. Every time Ash's chest rose, no matter how faintly, relief swept through her like a tide. Every twitch of its ear, every tiny breath was proof that the emptiness in the house was cracking just a little. When her grandmother laid a hand on her shoulder, Emily looked up. The older woman's eyes were soft, glistening. Emily glanced back at Ash for the first time since she could remember the silence. Didn't hurt. 3 days after that night blurred into something gentle, something sacred. From the moment Emily carried Ash into Fikabin, her world narrowed to the small life she had cradled. Against her chest she fed him drop by drop, her hands trembling the first time his tongue flicked weakly against the milk. She slept curled around him on the rug by the fire, afraid that if she let go, Feckled would steal him back. When he whimpered in his sleep, she whispered soft words into his fur until the sound faded. Somewhere in those long nights, Emily realized she wasn't just saving him, he was saving her, too. When the last of the winter chill began to fade and the snow turned slushy under the soft light of early spring, something beautiful had already begun to change in the cabin tucked deep in the woods. What once lay in the snow as a trembling, helpless creature was now growing stronger with each passing day. Ash, the little life Emily had rescued from the icy dark, was no longer that fragile bundle she had carried home in her coat. His legs, once unsteady and unsure, now held him with quiet confidence, and wherever Emily walked, he was never more than a few steps behind. His small body brushing against her legs like a shadow made of warmth. To anyone else, Ash might still have looked like a pup, curious and soft. But to Emily, he was everything. He had become the gentle answer to the ache she had carried in her chest since loss took everything familiar from her world. Every morning, before the sun even rose through the frost-kissed window, she'd feel the warm puff of his breath against her hand, and her fingers would curl around his soft fur in quiet comfort. Every night, as darkness fell over the trees and silence returned to the mountains, she'd whisper the same soft promise into his ear, a vow born from pain, shaped by love. You'll never be alone again, not while I'm here. Ash wasn't just a dog to her. He wasn't just some animal she had taken in to pass the lonely days. He was hers, her miracle, her little heartbeat wrapped in fur. The one small, steady thing that had filled the empty corners of the cabin and of her heart with something warm and real again, but not everyone saw him through the same lens. Emily's grandmother, wise and quiet, noticed the small things that Emily missed, things that didn't fit neatly into the story of a rescued pup. Sometimes, when Ash padded across the creaky wooden floor with steps too precise, her grandmother's hands would still in mid-motion. The knitting needles would pause in the air. A dishcloth would remain forgotten in her lap. Her eyes didn't flash with fear, but with something else. Recognition. Unease. As if seeing something not quite wrong, but not quite explainable either. Ash moved with an unusual grace, his paws landing silently, not like the clumsy bounds of most growing puppies. He would stop suddenly, ears raised, head tilted not at a noise within the cabin, but something outside, something distant, beyond human hearing. When the wind rustled the tall pine trees, Emily might not notice, but Ash always did. His head would lift, his body would still, and her grandmother, sitting quietly nearby, would purse her lips and hold her breath, the words on her tongue never spoken. She'd force her face to relax before Emily could notice, stretching a smile over her features, though it never quite reached her eyes. Then, one quiet evening, Emily did notice. She glanced up from her book to see her grandmother watching Ash. In silence. Without thinking, she wrapped her arms protectively around him, resting her cheek against his shoulder, which had grown broader with time. "He's getting big, isn't he, Grandma?" she asked with a soft laugh. Her voice filled with pride. Her grandmother's smile trembled just for a moment before settling into something calm and careful. "Yes, sweetheart, he is," she said gently. Her voice carried love, but her hands, wrapped around a chipped mug of tea, gripped a little tighter than before. She didn't say what was on her mind. Not now. Not when Emily's face had begun to glow again with joy, something they both feared might never return. That night, long after her grandmother's footsteps had faded into sleep, Emily stayed awake, with Ash curled beside her. She ran her fingers through his thickening fur, felt the solid beat of his heart beneath her palm. "You're mine," she whispered into the quiet dark, her voice soft and sure. But outside, hidden among the black trees and heavy clouds, the wind carried something with it. A low sound, almost like a cry or a song. It was distant, aching, like the mountain itself calling out. Ash's ears twitched. He didn't move, but his body was alert. And for the first time, something shifted in Emily's chest. A small sliver of doubt, sharp and cold, crept in like the first crack across frozen river ice. The night the truth came to them was still, and strange, so quiet it felt like the world was holding its breath. Emily woke to a sound she couldn't name. Not a bark, not a howl. It was deeper, older, full of sadness. She stepped softly into the front room. Only glowing embers lit the cabin now. The rug by the fire, Ash's usual spot, was empty. "Ash?" she called softly, barely above a whisper. Her voice felt too loud in the quiet, and then she saw him, standing at the door, his silhouette bathed in pale moonlight that spilled through the cracks. He stood tall, still, every muscle alert. In that moment, he didn't look like the pup she'd rescued. He looked ancient, wild, powerful, as if something greater had always lived beneath the surface of his skin. "Ash?" she said again, quieter now, the name catching in her throat. He turned to her slowly, and when his eyes met hers, something inside her gave way. The eyes that had once looked up at her with playful trust now burned with molten gold, fierce and deep eyes that didn't belong to anything tame. For a second, fear brushed against her heart, not of him, but of what it meant, of what she might lose if the truth meant letting go. Before she could think, her body moved. She dropped to her knees, reaching through the moonlight until her hands found his fur. "You're still mine," she breathed, her voice cracking under the weight of everything she felt. "I don't care what you are. You're not going anywhere. Without me." Ash didn't pull away. He leaned closer. His breath warmed her cheek, and she buried her face in his thick fur, holding him like she could keep the world from taking him back. Whatever he was, it didn't matter. He was hers. She was his.